Hello, everyone. At the time of this recording, it is still the 23rd of July, marking the 6th anniversary since I published my debut novel, Apocalypse Virus Initial Infection. And this year is also 10 years since I first started that book. And a lot's happened over the last decade. And I've learned a lot about not just writing, but what it takes to run a small business as an artist. And I figured this would be a good time to share some of the things I've learned for so that my fellow artists, small business owners, and any of y'all trying to find themselves or figure out what your dreams and goals are. So that way you might have a slightly easier time of it than I did. In the 6 years since I published Initial Infection, I've published a total of 9 books, 7 self-published, 2 with Pegasus Publishing, and I've sold a little over 2,600 copies across those titles, and that it includes paperback format, Audible and iTunes for the first 3 books of Apocalypse Fire series, and ebook format. And I'd say about 90% of those sales, if not more, came from in-person sales at like conventions, Comic Cons, just me reaching out to people anytime I put out a new book, being like, hey, I have this new book. Would you like to buy it? Which always feels a little weird. Um, because while I love talking about the stuff that I do, I always feel weird asking people to buy my art. Um, to the point that like I've for most of my career selling paintings and like my visual media, I have undersold or undercharged for my work. And like I've sold over 100 paintings at this point. Um, and I usually make back cost of materials so that I can keep doing more paintings. Uh, it's only like in the last year or two, maybe 3, that I've actually gotten a lot better about like accurately pricing my art for not just cost of materials, but also time that goes into it. Um, which has been a learning curve, which, part of what we're going to talk about. Uh, so before we get into the meats and potatoes of it, for the anniversary, I am putting out a new promo code that'll be down here below. It is 6-year anniversary. And if you go over to my website, kurtlandneal.com, which will probably be somewhere up here, and put in that promo code, you'll get 30% off the whole store. So that if you buy 1 book, that's 30% off that 1 book. If you buy all the books, that's 30% off all the books. This promo code is valid now through the 31st of August. And without further ado, let's get into it. Growing up as a kid, one of the earliest dreams I remember having is knowing that I wanted to publish a book. At the time, I couldn't get any story past 20 pages, so I just assumed I would be lucky to publish a collection of poetry, and then that'd be it, right? And then I'm on active duty. I think at the time I started Initial Infection, I was like maybe a year and a half in. And so I started it on those like little green memo notebooks that like fit in your pocket. They're about yay big, uh, something like that. And a lot of the earlier bits were written on those little memo notebooks. And like I still have a vivid memory of being out on the flight line with some of my fellow airmen and workshopping names for that first book. Um, and like part of the reason it took 4 years for me to publish or for me to finish that book and publish it is by and large I was figuring out like good writing habits for me. Um, because I think that's something that every new author has to go through is the habit because a book isn't written in a day unless you're Stephen King and then you can just sit down at your computer for hours on end and crank out a book in like 2 to 3 months. That wasn't me. I've gotten better, and depending on the genre and size of the book, I'm Like both my kids' books, I came up with the first draft in like an hour, but they're kids' books. So it's like 16 pages of text, 16 illustrations. It's like not a whole lot. But an 80, 90,000 word sci-fi book, uh, it's going to take a little while longer. And so while I don't hold like some authors will say that they have like consistent like 9 o'clock to noon, they sit down in front of their computer and write. Especially when I was on active duty, I didn't always have that luxury. So I found time to write when and where I could, even if that meant I was writing analog on with pen and paper, and then I would go through and type it up later on my computer. When I would hit writer's block, I would go out for a walk, go to the gym, read a book because I don't remember who said it, but the best writers are the best readers, and the best artists are the ones who consume art with the most like analytical and like deconstructive mindset, and basically just approaching everything with the mindset of what can I learn from this, or what do I like about this, why do I like it, or why don't I like it. And I think that's helped a lot. Like one of my favorite books about writing and authorship is Stephen King's On Writing. If you're an author, I definitely recommend going and checking it out. I'm not saying that every aspect of it is gospel and needs to be followed to the letter, because writing is unique to each person that feels called to write. I'm very big on taking in a lot of information and a lot of different strategies, and then basically choosing what works for you and what doesn't, right? Um, Kind of like a buffet of habits or techniques and stuff like that. So the as any of you who read the first publication, because the nice thing about it being self-published is if you're like me and need to do some revisions without it like being a complete overhaul of the book, it's a live document you can go on, you can edit it, and then you can republish it. Which is why, like, I think the first like 100 to 200 copies of Innocence Lost, not Innocence Lost, that's the fantasy book that I'm currently querying. We'll get to that one later. Initial Infection. I have something with eyes, I think. Oh well, that's besides the point. Um, the first like 200 copies of Initial Infection sold had a lot of grammatical stuff that, like, had it gone through another round or two of edits, would have been caught, or had I hired an actual editor instead of doing it myself. Which, yeah, number one piece of advice to any author beyond figuring out like habits that allow you to write the most or the best is edit. Edit, edit, edit. If you think it's good, set it aside for a week, do one more round of edits. And I cannot stress this enough. Get an editor. If you're traditionally publishing and querying an agent or going through a vanity publisher like Pegasus, they will find you an editor. So you don't have to pay for an editor yourself. If you just got money like that and just want to send it to an editor, by all means, I'm not going to tell you how to spend your money. Um, but I know, at least for me, little broke bitch author that I am, uh, I was trying to save money wherever I could. And that first book was also written using the Hemingway method, which, for those of you that don't know, means a lot of alcohol was involved. Because, early 20s, in the military, had some injuries and some mental health stuff I was pretending wasn't there, because that's healthy. Don't recommend that. But, yeah, I was actually I tried finding an editor or two, but then everybody kept coming back with prices that I now, in hindsight, realize were respectable prices. But for it being my first thing and me being like a little, like, I just thought this would be a one off, thought it would be a cute little hobby thing. I wasn't prepared mentally or financially to shell out $800 at the time, uh, which I think was about the going rate for editing services back then. But yeah, yeah, definitely don't go about it the way I did, where you come home from work, sit down with a case of beer, and start editing, because that's a good way to get a lot of typos and a lot of people messaging you being like, "Hey, what happened?" um, and like, I've got a version of it ready for whenever I get around to doing a hardback edition that I will be sending off to a legit editor, and then probably adjust the paperback version to reflect those edits. But for right now, I'm not in a place to uh, keep pursuing the hardback. So that has been tabled. But it is something that I'm aware of. I still stand by that it's a great story, and I still love the story and the characters, and they're very near and dear to me. And I definitely had to write that rough first book to be able to write the rest of the series. Like, I never thought like I said, I was never able to write anything past 20 pages. And then the first book I write is a 5-book series. Um, so yeah, that's a little crazy. But yeah, whether it's for your mental health, your art, whatever, consume art from other creators and experiment with your process to find out what works for you and what doesn't. Because there are some things that I didn't think would work, but I gave it a try anyway. This is more prevalent towards things like sci-fi or like historical fiction, but has also, as I've worked on my first fantasy book and now I'm working on the sequel, there's a lot more research that goes into it than I ever imagined, at least for me. I do a lot of creature builds, and so I stay reading mythology and different stuff like that for inspiration. And then when it comes to the sci-fi stuff, like Initial Infection goes, or the whole Apocalypse Fire series really goes very heavily into AI, nanotech, and genetic experimentation. And so I had to do a lot of research, and there's also a lot of geopolitical stuff, um, which wasn't originally part of the plan, but it's just sort of how that backstory developed. That's the other thing is I'm not a plotter. Usually, when you're in writing spaces, you'll hear uh, seamers and plotters. Seamers are authors who write by the seam of their pants and will oftentimes write themselves into a corner and then be like, "How do I get out of here?" And then there are plotters who will like Excel spreadsheet that shit, and I'm neither. I tend to write out like basically bullet points or a few paragraphs, and I can do an entire chapter that way. So it could be like, um, so like let's take Dylan Thompson for example, the main character of Initial Infection. Chapter one, I think it was something along the lines of Dylan wakes up from a 3-day party, has to clean up, goes to the bar with his friends to have lunch, and then falls asleep and cleaning up. So like that's like what, 3-4 sentences? So nothing crazy. And I think the first chapter was like 10-15 pages because action and dialogue and all this other stuff. Oh, another thing for dialogue, whether you are writing for screen or for the page, whatever. Some of the best dialogue, good practice is going out in public and listening to random ass conversations, because then you get to hear a lot of distinct voices and like speech patterns that then go on to inform your characters and make them feel more alive and more lived in and more like fully rounded people. um, which goes into research. Like, there's a lot. I learned more about guns and firearms than I ever cared to for the Apocalypse Virus series. Because they're like, I go into like model numbers and like how a discontinued Soviet pistol from the 50s managed to get into like the Middle East. And there's a lot of stuff that I put in there that was me just looking at history and recognizing certain patterns that has since become rather timely and relevant in weird ways that I didn't expect to. Uh, so I don't know what that says about me, but maybe it's just pattern recognition is strong. So there are a few different types of publishing. There's self-published, which is how I did the Apocalypse Fire series and my 2 poetry books. And for that, I had to no matter which type of publishing you're doing, you got to finish the manuscript. You got to write that. Um, unless it's like nonfiction, you should have the manuscript finished before you start looking for representation. For initial infection, I tried querying, I think, 5 agents, but in hindsight, it, much like the one said, wasn't ready. And B, I also just didn't know how to write a fucking query letter, which is one of those skills that you have to study and you have to practice. And query letters, cover letters, different stuff like that. Like, I hate, because to me, it just feels like and I know that this might just be a hang up of mine, but it almost feels like groveling for somebody's approval. And like, I just want to put art out there, man. I don't want to worry about what fucking Bob in New York has to say about my stuff. But that is, for better or for worse, part of the industry. And I've gone through like a dozen iterations of the query letter that I'm working on now to query my fantasy book. So that's fun. But we are prioritizing the art over our feelings, which I feel like is a good place to be, to like push yourself out of your comfort zone. Um, where was I? Oh yes, different types of publishing. So self-publishing, then you have smaller like indie publishers, which are like usually like uh, small or regional publishing houses that aren't like Penguin Random House is like a traditional publisher. Um, Macmillan, Tor, guys like those. And then you have what are called vanity publishers. And like, I don't have any experience in indie publishing, so I'm not going to speak too heavily on that. There are plenty of other authors who have. My experience so far has been self-publishing and vanity publishing, which I didn't realize was vanity publishing until after I was starting to work on the first book with them. But that's 100% me not doing my due diligence and doing the research that I should have. So a vanity publisher is a publishing house that usually you can submit to them directly. And so, like with Pegasus, they accepted direct queries, which is usually a good indication that a publishing house is either indie or vanity. And for Pegasus, I sent them the manuscript of my kids' book, and they're just like, cool, we like this. We're willing to publish it for you, and you'll get 16 pages or 16 illustrations. And then I had to pay uh, a sum. I think it was £3,500 because they're based in London, which came out to like, I don't know, somewhere around 3,800 US dollars. But they offered payment plans, and so like it was just like 340 a month for 10 months basically. And with them, as it's not uncommon for publishers to put in the contract right of first refusal on X number of books, which for them was, I think, the next one or two books, which is why I directly submitted the next kid's book to them. But that is not a like binding thing so much as a courtesy thing. And so, like, if, say, hypothetically, not that I've had this experience, uh, the production team is unprofessional with not giving you updates in a timely manner or not letting you know when the point of contact has changed or who the production team lead has changed. And it's been months since you heard from them. And you're just like, hey, looking for an update. And then they send you some garbage that looks like they copied and pasted what you sent as the manuscript to tell the illustrator what to do. And they didn't do any sort of like internal review. Right. But that's never happened to me. Because it's been a month now since I published Guess the Grumpy Gator, and guess who still hasn't sent me my copies? Because they keep making mistakes. So yeah, not gonna get into that tangent right now. That might be a topic for another video. So some aspects of production for self-publishing a book are you will probably go through Kindle Direct Publishing or KDP and Ingram Spark. So KDP is best for getting it out on Kindle ebook and shipping it worldwide and getting it just on like online stores. And then I've also so far ordered all my author copies through them, which an author copy, for those of you that don't know, is I as the author and just like, hey, Amazon, I want 10 copies of my book. And then I basically pay cost of print and cost to ship. So that way I can sell them in person and still make a decent profit. So I actually make more money selling them in person or through my website than I do through Amazon, because Amazon takes a hefty sum. So I think for every book that I sell or every paperback that I sell on KDP, I make maybe $3-4. Whereas and they keep changing their stuff every year so that us as authors make less and less on royalties, and yet Bezos keeps making more and more. Unfortunately, Bezos did a really good job at covering the market, so it's very hard to find anywhere comparable that pays better royalties that offers what they do. But I've also had a myriad of printing issues and various other things that have come back wrong from KDP. And especially when it gets to the cover art, there can be a massive headache getting it like within the boxes. But also Ingram Spark. So KDP will provide you an ISBN, which is your international serial book number or something like that. It's the little coding on the back that goes on your, oh god, you can't see that. There we go. So ISBN. It's usually on the QR code, or not QR code, barcode. There we go. That's the word. KDP will provide you with an ISBN, whereas if you go Ingram Spark, you will have to purchase an ISBN, I went through it's Boker, Bowker, and they basically just registered ISBNs that you purchase. So like I did a batch of 10 ISBNs and you don't have to assign them all at once. And then that then allows you to put them on Ingram Spark because you can't use a KDP ISBN on Ingram Spark. Um, but the benefit of being on Ingram Spark is that it allows you to get your books as a self-published author on like Barnes and Noble shelves and various other stores. Because a lot of stores, if it's just me with the copies, then that is what is considered consignment. And the stores have a hard time making back their profit a lot of the times, and so they're a lot less likely to go that route unless it's like a smaller mom and pop. So they prefer to order it through somebody like Ingram Spark, which has a return policy and all that. So yeah, and Ingram Spark is the biggest headache I've had with getting, like, they want it down to the cover art specifics down to a like point. Yeah, it's three numbers past the decimal, like how specific they want it. And yet they won't give you any guidance. It's just both Ingram Spark and KDP have their own issues because a lot of it is just automated. And so it is not the clearest instructions on how to make those corrections. And their templates are not the most intuitive. So it takes a lot of experimenting with and a lot of YouTube videos to watch. And then ACX, which is a Audible subsidiary, is where you would go to as a self-published author to get your book turned into a audiobook. And that is by far the most expensive part of this so far, because at this point I've paid for the copyright to file a copyright with I think it was the Trademark and Patent Office handles copyrights. I don't remember, it's been a while. Because with Pegasus they handled copyright and all that other stuff. But as a self-published author, copyright's on you. And while some authors will tell you that if you just send it in an email to yourself, that covers the copyright issues. If you get into the point of like a legal battle for whatever reason, it makes it very hard. It's a lot easier to win those cases if you have like a certified copyright certificate. So, as a self-published, you've already paid for the copyright. You've paid for the editor. You've paid for the cover art. You've paid for the ISBN. And then now you're paying for a narrator. And you have two options on ACX, or at least last time I checked. It was either share royalties or pay them per finished hour. I chose pay per finished hour, even though it was more expensive at the time, because on the off chance, and I say off chance because it is an off chance, and I was realistic with this from the start. On the off chance my books blow up tomorrow and I'm selling audiobooks like hotcakes, I would rather know that I paid somebody outright rather than having to keep up with the complicated accounting of making sure that they get their royalty percentage. So, yeah, I think that about covers the production aspects of self publishing. And I can go more in depth in KDP and Ingram Spark at a later date. Now, for the business aspects of being a author, artist, small business. So, like I said at the beginning of the video, I make 95% of my sales live and in person. And I do that at artist markets. Like when I was in Savannah, I would go down. It was like a busker's permit through I want to say Parks and Recs office. I paid a money order once a year, got a little ID, and mine was actually a performer because I would perform my poetry for anybody that wanted to hear it. or wanted to buy a copy, they got a free performance of a poem. And so I was out there as many days as I could, which made me get really good at salesmanship. If you are an author, painter, whatever kind of artist, or a small business owner, even if it's not like your business directly to the customer, like if it's peer to peer stuff, you have to get good at sales and networking. Like it can be annoying. I know some people don't like it. Some people are very uncomfortable by it, but I've benefited more from reading books on salesmanship. Like I think one was, I don't know if it was Zig Ziglar or someone else, but like Sell Your Way to the Top was the name of it. And then Rich Dad Poor Dad was another one. And there have just been a lot of books that have helped me to develop my sales ability and my networking ability. Because an old adage that holds true, especially in the creative arts, is it's not what you know so much as who you know. So, yeah, study salesmanship and networking. And if you struggle in those areas, there are plenty of books, plenty of YouTube videos, and plenty of like courses and stuff. So, like, if you're not the best at networking or public speaking, I would recommend something like a Toastmasters, which they have them in most cities, and it helps for a lot of public speaking stuff. But with that out of the way, artist markets and like Comic Cons. And so for those, I had to go and look on. So I would just search Comic Cons 24, 2024, or whatever, and then go to a page that has a bunch of them listed out. And it usually shows name of the convention, what the date, the location, and the like theme or genre. Because not all conventions are like Comic Cons. Like I've been to horror conventions and got to meet some of the Walking Dead actors, which was really cool. Because I was also an extra in, or a zombie in the last like 2, 3 episodes of Fear of the Walking Dead. So that was something that I got to like talk to them and bond to them about. Because I'm also an actor. But anyways, yeah, conventions. And I found that like getting things like this banner, business cards, uh, stickers, little bags, like little things like that, that as an artist, when you're starting out, you it's very easy to be like, oh, that doesn't matter. They're gonna love my art and stuff. But you remember the little things. And so remembering, like, you're gonna feel a lot better walking away from a booth that gave you a little paper bag to stick your stuff in, as opposed to the booth that now you got this big clunky thing that you gotta lug around, right? At least that's how I think about it. And I go paper because it's the most eco-friendly option. If I could afford it, I'd go something like hemp or bamboo paper. But once again, we're still we're still trying to find our footing. Um, Also, if you're doing a lot of these conventions and stuff, it will ask for a business name. You could do like an LLC or a sole proprietorship. And I'm not the best person to explain those or the differences or like all the logistics for that. So if that's something you're interested in or you're at that stage, go check out plenty of good YouTube videos on it that will help steer you in the right direction. Uh, so, as I mentioned with that, and then also I have a website, kurtlandneal.com, and I have business cards and I make stickers, bookmarks, flyers, a whole lot of stuff. I do it all through Vistaprint, and Vistaprint has a partnership with Wix, which is who I have my website through. And so like I own the domain that has my name, and I pay like, I don't know, $36 a month to keep that domain open and live. And like run a store through the website, which hasn't made haven't broken even on that, so that's a continuing cost. But it is one of those things that does help credibility and makes you seem more legit, because a lot of these conventions will ask if you have a website and stuff like that. And then also being able to direct people directly to your store as opposed to Amazon ensures that while I do have to do the order fulfillment that way, does ensure that I get more of the profit as opposed to Bezos. And I touched on stickers a little bit. I hired my friend Livia to who she's a wonderful illustrator. She's or illustrator? Yeah, illustrator, not animator. She's a wonderful illustrator and has done several of my monsters from the sci-fi series. And once I've illustrated all of the monsters from Apocalypse Virus, I'm going to put together a little bestiary and put that out for all of you to enjoy. That is probably a few years down the line because, yeah, once again, just trying to survive at this point. So and going to conventions has given me a lot of great ideas for merch that I, on my own, wouldn't have thought about, and ways to like improve my setup. And with all this, it is important to be flexible, and whatever plan you have probably won't, nothing goes as you plan. To quote Harry Potter, you plan and you plan and you plan, and then everything goes to shit. So have a good rough plan, but be flexible and open to deviating from said plan. Like, don't let it crash your day. So, some of the biggest pitfalls and setbacks I've experienced in the last 6 years. So, probably the largest one was a convention in DC, which was the farthest I had ever driven for a convention. This would have been, I think, 2023, 2024. I think 2024. Um, and I'd done all this research and saw the kind of attendance numbers that they had done the years prior, and like how great it had been, and like how much had been spent there. But one thing I neglected or overlooked in my research was the fact that that convention had usually been held in, I think it was like June or July. And the year that I went, it had gotten moved to, it was either February or March. And it was right on the cusp of two other conventions in the area. So a lot of the local people were just tapped on money. And then it was also the same weekend as Biden's last State of the Union address. And so, like, a lot of locals had also just left DC to try and avoid the madness. And there were a lot of road closures and stuff when we drove in Thursday night during the State of the Union. Um, and it was the first time I really took a big swing on my business. Like, I got individual investors to invest in the business. I think I raised like 9 grand to expand my inventory. And then, you know, it didn't turn out nearly as well as I thought. And here we are 2.5 years later, and there's still a closet full of inventory staring me in the face. I've paid off most of the investors, but like there's still, I think, a solid like 2-3 grand that I owe people still for that. And so like that hangs over my head. Um, and like that's the other thing is like you want to believe in yourself, and you have all these other people believing in yourself. And then when you take that chance and it doesn't work out like any of you had hoped, it like I probably spent better part of a month after AwesomeCon questioning if I was going to keep being or keep going to conventions and keep going to markets, and whether or not to just drop all my. So I returned the inventory I could, but some of it, because of how far out I had ordered it, I missed the return window. And so that, and like there have been a lot of moments throughout the last 6 years where I've had to like do a deep personal inventory and be like, is this what we want to do forever? And keep doing. And the business aspect of it can be soul crushing sometimes. Like I did 3 conventions last year in the Atlanta area, and well, 2 in the Atlanta area, 1 in Savannah. And I didn't make my table for any of them, let alone travel or food or anything else. And so, like, I'm not doing any conventions this year. And I recognize part of it is how niche my books are because it's apocalyptic sci fi, poetry, and a kid's book. And so I am cognizant of that. But when you're doing good enough at all the little markets and consistently enough, like I was, and it feels like you're starting to make it and starting to establish yourself, and then you just like better part of a year and a half, 2 years of just getting your shit pushed in, it's very, very hard to find a reason to keep going at it. And so like I've had to take a big step back from the business aspect of it to rekindle my love for the art of it. And clearly I still love it because I'm still posting about it, I'm still writing almost every day. But like I don't know how much of that is love and how much of that is like compulsion. Like I can't not write. Because like I just come up with these stories. Like right now I'm working on a comic book version of Initial Infection, but I'm also having to take the time to foster a better art style of my own because I'm going to write it and draw it. And then I'm probably going to submit to either Image or Dark Horse. Haven't decided yet. But that's probably a 2 or 3 year project. And then this fantasy book that I just finished has been a 5 year project. And then now I'm querying agents, which means it'll probably be another year or two until it's published. So in the interim of the last decade, I had a change of assignment to Okinawa, Japan. Loved it there. Didn't want to leave. And then I found acting there. And then from that newfound passion, went to college for acting and worked on a few films. But then while I was getting my degree, there was the actors writers strike. And so a lot of stuff shut down. And then a lot of stuff subsequently moved overseas. And I thought moving to Atlanta for my senior year would help. But most of Atlanta is either theater work that half of it doesn't pay, or the stuff that does pay is very, like, I think one production, they had 8 or 9 roles and it was like 450 people audition for it. And a lot of, at least around Atlanta, a lot of the casting for theater seems to be like uh, either Good Old Boy Network or like they all have their darlings, which can be frustrating as somebody who moves in from somewhere else. And then I was working at one theater, but then that theater basically went under and I got laid off. And like Georgia Ensemble Theater still owes me 270 some dollars. They owe a lot of people a lot of money, which is why they dissolved. Um, so if you're hearing this, Georgia Ensemble Theater, where's my money? Because like the board kept saying that they were going to try to pay everybody, but it's been 3 months and they didn't even tell us that the board had voted to dissolve the organization. I had to hear about it from somebody else. So that was frustrating. And throughout these many life and career changes, art has been the one thing that has grounded me. Even though now, like, so right now, I started volunteering at the aquarium. I'm working a survival job which I've had a lot of survival jobs. That is one thing that very few authors, very few actors are able to pay all their bills, and very few artists in general are able to pay all their bills with their art. If it wasn't for my VA benefits, I'd have been homeless. Um, and I'm very fortunate in that regard. So if you're going to pursue it, do it in a smart way that works for you. Don't think that just because Joe Schmo was able to quit his job because he had however much money set aside because mommy and daddy have always been wealthy. Like, that's probably not going to work for you, dog. Um, and like, I've worked a lot of bar jobs, worked at Chick-fil-A, Home Depot, Papa John's, and like, not for overly long periods of time, just because part of it's because my injuries will then make it harder for me to do those jobs long term. And then another part of it is just most service and retail jobs are just dog. You have to find a reason to make the art beyond money because the money is not guaranteed. Like, I wrote that first book knowing that there was a possibility that nobody aside from my mom read it, but as long as she enjoyed it, it was worth it. And then I've been blown away with the positive reception so far. And, you know, if something doesn't work and you want to find a way, you will find a way. Like I said, I'm taking a break off conventions and I am finishing up this fantasy book because I do want to publish in every genre. And then that'll also give me a wider range. You touch enough niches, you're going to be a broad spectrum artist. Don't be afraid to start over. I just turned 30 and I'm positioning myself for third major career change since I left high school because there was the military, then there was acting, and now I'm waiting to hear if I got into UGA for marine sciences. And I'm gonna, because I, growing up, I thought I would be a marine biologist, and then, life happened. Uh, and so now I'm trying to find a way forward on that because if I have to get a day job to support my art, I'm gonna do something I'm passionate about, dude. And most marine science jobs require a master's. And so I took the time to figure out how to go about that and look for places to do it and stuff like that. And so I should hear back by the end of next month as to whether or not I got in. So fingers crossed. But if I don't get accepted this year, I'm gonna try again. And like, I'm doing steps like volunteering at the aquarium to make it so that I am more like, it shows that I'm really passionate about this and gives me something else to add to my resume. And like, I put in for a couple of internships at the aquarium, so we'll see how those go. I know I've kind of rambled on a good bit and it kind of got a little doom and gloom there at the end, but I do still love writing. I still love acting. And I still love painting. I just have had to come to terms with the fact that where the economy, those industries, and my financials are right now, I need to find something else to pay my bills and to take care of me day to day. And I haven't really talked about it a whole lot because there's been a lot of like shame, ego, whatever you want to call it. But like, oh, I felt like I was making it as an artist and now I'm not. Uh, but that's life, you know? Like, I still got my health. I've still got an amazing partner of 3.5 years. Sounds right. Um, and I'm still getting through, and I'm A little over 2 months sober. Yeah, something like that. So, I'm taking care of myself, which I feel like a lot of artists and a lot of small business owners tend to neglect. But if you don't have your health, you're not going to have any longevity in whatever you do. So that's another part of those habits is finding stuff outside of your passion that allows you to keep doing your passion. And so like I have to go to the and work out X number of hours a week to manage my injuries and also to get me the serotonin and other endorphins that I need to, you know, not be depressed. But yeah, I also go outside and am in nature because there's a lot of science that shows that the more time you spend in nature, the more creative you are, and all this other stuff. I try to eat as healthy as possible, but also I like food. So, you know, and then sleep. There's a lot of this like grind, 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 hustle, hustle, hustle culture, but depriving your like I'm not saying you need 8 hours of sleep. Like it varies person to person, and like men can get away with sleeping less than women. I don't remember the exact reasoning or scientific literature, but it was the equivalent that like if a woman loses 1 hour of sleep, it's equivalent to a man losing 2 hours of sleep as like how it affects us. Uh, but yeah, I'm not that I'm not overly knowledgeable in that kind of science. So do your own research. I always advocate do your own research. I've learned a lot of different stuff and taken a lot of substances and had a lot of trauma. So not everything sticks how it should in my brain. I feel like we went off on a little ADHD tangent. Maybe I'll edit all that out. Who knows? Um, but yeah, just a little peek behind the curtain. It realistically, most small businesses aren't gonna make a profit the first like 7 to 10 years. And if you're an artist, it's a lot harder. So like I have been able to finance further production of my art and my books, but not enough to make any substantial profit. And like everything has gone back into the business, which for tax purposes means that the business hasn't really made any money. For the purposes of my bank account, also means the business hasn't made any money. Uh, who knows? Maybe Innocence Lost will be my breakout hit, and Tor Publishing would pick it up, and it'll be a New York Times bestseller. But, probably not. But you gotta have hope. You gotta have goals and aim for it. So, thank you for listening to my ramblings, and thank you for your continued support. And make sure to head on over to my website, kurtlandneal.com, to enter your promo code 6-year anniversary to get 30% off everything in the store. And I mail out signed copies when you order through my store. That's another thing. When you order through my store, I sign every copy and I sign it directly to you. So it's one of a kind and unique, and there'll never be another one like it. Unless you lose it and then you reorder it and then tell me your name and I will try to re-sign it. Thank you all. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Follow me on all my social medias. Follow me on all my social medias, which will be right over here. And if you would like to keep up to date, I have a email list, like newsletter option at the bottom of my homepage on my website. And then I also have a Substack and a Patreon, which I post a lot of stuff on. I need to be better at posting it, But I'm giving myself the grace because I've been very busy the last 3 weeks. So, yes. And there will be exclusive stuff on those that you won't get any. All right, the one that started it all, Apocalypse Virus Initial Infection. It is the first part of a 5-book series. So we have Initial Infection, we have Symptomatic, we have Deterioration, we have Inoperable, and then we have System Failure. And for those of you pathology whizzes out there, each book is titled after a different stage of the disease process, because we like everything being on theme. In Apocalypse Virus, Dylan Thompson is a retired military veteran, 1 year into retirement when shit hits the fan. And now he's fighting giant mutant monsters, gang leaders turned warlords, and Summerfield Technical Solutions, the corporation that made the virus and started all of this. And is just trying to keep his friends alive and hold on to whatever bits of humanity he has left. Then you have the brilliant scientist, Tabitha Jones, who, after a break in at her lab, discovers a massive cup and finds out that there are more nefarious elements in play at her work. And the farther she digs for the truth, the more her life is in danger. In this series, Summerfield creates a virus that kills 40% of the population, turns another 40 into giant mutant monsters like stuff out of mythology, and leaves 20% alive to fight and fend for themselves. So it's like Resident Evil meets Clash of the Titans. And in addition to the books, I also have some stickers of the monsters drawn by the wonderful Livia Schumann, available on my website. And when I was 15, I started writing poetry in a little composition book that at some point was reinforced with duct tape, but then was still falling apart. And so when I was working on Symptomatic, book 2 in the Apocalypse Virus series, I had went ahead and typed them all up to make sure I didn't lose them, and had enough for this little booklet, Inner Workings Poetic Therapy. This cover is actually a mental health photo shoot that I designed and modeled in, and this is meant to be a depiction of what my anxiety attacks were like. And in Inner Workings, it follows my journey from 15 to 23, dealing with surviving sexual assault, the beginnings of PTSD, substance abuse, depression, anxiety, and just poems as a medium for me trying to work through all that. And then when I was on active duty, I lost 3 friends in 10 days and spent the following 9 months crawling into every alcohol and pill bottle I could get a hold of. And it is the worst non suicidal depression I've had. And out of that came The Relapse, a collection of poems that are me working through that grief and finding my way back to a good place. And then we have my first children's book, Facts and Opinions, meant to teach elementary school age kids and some adults the difference, and that while differing opinions can be challenging, as long as you treat others with kindness and respect, you'll have more friends to play with, and that we go farther together than alone. And my newest children's book that I just published, that I don't have copies of yet, is Gus the Grumpy Gator, where Gus is throwing a temper tantrum at recess. So Mr. Penguin pulls him aside and runs him through a bunch of daily habits for a healthy mind and body. And at the end of it, he teaches Gus that while his feelings are valid, it doesn't excuse him ruining everybody else's good time. And both Gus the Grumpy Gator and Facts and Opinions, I feel, are timely lessons that will help both the children and the adults that read it to them to develop better habits and help to navigate some very complicated and hard topics.